going to call this meeting to order. I don't think there's a need to take a roll, but this is a meeting of the General Government Subcommittee of the Senate Finance Committee, and we have 4 members here, so why don't we go ahead and launch in. We are first going to hear from Trish Bishop, the Director of the Virginia Retirement System, colloquially known as VRS. She will give a general update and an overview of plan contribution rates and proposals in the introduced budget, as well as VRS-related legislation before the General Assembly this year. And then we'll hear from Mike Watson, who is the Chief Information Security Officer, and Josh Heslinga, Director of Legal and Legislative Affairs for VITA. Are you all here? Perfect. Okay. Who will talk about cybersecurity and our infrastructure. And then we'll finally hear from Chris Piper, Commissioner of Department of Elections. Hey, Chris, there you are. Who will provide an update on a project to replace the Virginia Election and Registration Information System. This meeting is being broadcast, so please speak into your microphones for the panel up here. And let's start with Trish. Thanks very much.
Mr. Chair.
Rates.
Yeah.
I don't have a
Locke.
question, but I just got a text from someone who said that they can't hear anything.
Okay, who's in control here in terms of the audio? Adam? Okay. Does everyone have their mics activated? I think you'll be a
Test.
green light.
It's green.
Okay, if it's green, then
Test.
you're good.
I'll sit closer to the mic, maybe.
I'll text someone and see what's going on.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Sounds like is it muted or something?
No, I don't think that. I think that's just video. I don't think it controls the audio.
Okay.
I guess it's just.
All right, well, we'll plow forward and hopefully we'll figure it out.
Thank you, Senator. Sorry about that. I'll sit closer. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially, really, the funding of the benefits really improves the health of the plan, and it's also viewed positively by the rating agencies who look to what plan sponsors, the level of contribution they're making. So just looking back at the value, the net position of the fund on slide 10, as of June 30th, we reached a historic high for the fund. We were at $102.5 billion. As of the 21st of this month, we were unaudited at $106.4 billion. The next slide, on slide 11, shows you the fiscal year returns for the plan. Again, as I mentioned, last year was an exceptional year. We had a 27.5% return on investments. We invest in both public and private markets, so the markets will impact our returns for the year. But we've structured the portfolio to weather these conditions as soundly as possible. And so when we look over the long term, when we look over the 25-year period that ended in September 30th, we had an 8.1% return over that 25-year period, which is in excess of the 6.75% return that we assume on how we discount our liabilities. I think all of you know on slide 12 that we have a fully diversified portfolio, and that's designed to limit risk, lowers exposure to a single asset or investment strategy, and helps mitigate any risks related to sharp or dramatic downturns. The next slide on 13 just gives you a graphical depiction of the various assets with which VRS invests. So now I'll kind of turn to the meat of the presentation, which is the funded status, and then we'll talk a little bit about contribution rates. Funded status is a commonly used measure to gauge the health of a plan. It measures the ratio of assets available to pay benefits compared to the plan's liabilities. So this next slide on 15 shows you the funded status of the state employee plan. And you'll notice that the blue bars are the historical funded status. The green are projections. The projections don't include the one-time infusion in the budget or the maintaining of the rates that are proposed in the introduced budget. But you'll notice that the funded status really increased significantly last year as a result of that double-digit return that we had. On an actuarial value of assets, which is where we smooth those investment returns over a 5-year period, we were at 77.1% funded for the state plan. Using just a market value snapshot in time, we were at 86.5% funded. And so even with that exceptional return, we still have considerable liabilities, with an unfunded liability on an actuarial basis of $6.1 billion and $3.6 on a market value. A similar pattern is shown for the teacher plan, but we were at 77.2% on an actuarial basis as of last year. And then on a market value, we were at 86.5% for teachers funded. And so again, the teacher plan still has considerable liabilities, about $12 billion, and you can see that on the right-hand side of the slide on an actuarial basis, and $7.1 billion on a market value. So this next slide, 17, is a little busy, and I apologize for that. But it provides the funded status and liabilities across all the plans. Just put it all there for your reference. But I circled in red that the total liabilities based on an actuarial basis are $19 billion, and then 11 on market value. And so over time, if assumptions are achieved, the actuarial basis and the market value will come together as long as assumptions are met. And so the other thing that's important to note when we think about these liabilities is that there's a structured plan in place to pay those down over time. And we have been doing that, and by 2043, those legacy liabilities that we set in 2013 will be fully paid off.
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
And I think all of us were here. Was it 2010 that we borrowed from VRS to balance the budget?
The 2010-12 biennium, yep.
Okay, all right, and we borrowed money from VRS.
Technically, you can't borrow, you
Okay.
just didn't pay the contribution. So it is.
Okay, all right, we moved money around without, okay, and have we caught up?
Yes, there was contributions were not paid those years, and then you set up a schedule of repayment.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so you have paid those back for both the teacher and the state employee plan. So those specific contributions that were not paid during that period have now been repaid to the fund.
Okay, second question. I know we break this into teachers, and then we have law enforcement, and most teachers, not all obviously, but most teachers are female. Most law enforcement are male. What is the life expectancy? I know before that the teachers was more of an issue because the women tended to live longer. The ex-teachers, former teachers tended to live longer. The law enforcement guys tended to die a little bit earlier. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so we just completed a mortality review last year, and we reset our assumptions where we generally assume folks in different, they're called generational mortality tables, that
Right.
they will live long, younger generations will live longer. And Sarah, do you know what the life expectancy is for the teachers? Do tend to be our longest livers, so that's
Right.
good news for anybody who's been an educator. Probably not as, so
There you go.
Yeah, the gap is getting smaller. Teachers are probably about 86 years old, but that gap is getting smaller between males and females. And
In teachers, or what about law enforcement?
so the law enforcement the mortality improvement has been more so in males, and the females has kind of slowed down. So they're getting a little bit closer, but the teachers are the longest living group. And like Trish said, that has all been updated.
And I assume we factor that all into our actuarials.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
yes. Great.
Adam?
Yeah, at the bottom of slides 15 and 16, it says under the notes, the projections do not include the proposed contribution rates and one-time infusion in the introduced budget. And I'm just kind of curious, with the one-time infusion in the introduced budget, how would you characterize things? I mean, when you mentioned that I think you said $19 billion short for one of the funds.
That's for everything, all of the statewide plans.
Okay, I mean, when you say
altogether.
$19 billion short, that sounds kind of alarming. But with the one-time infusion and projections for the future, how close are we getting to being properly funded?
We,
And I didn't mean to flip ahead if you're going to cover it later.
No, that's okay. I think it would be helpful to flip to, if we look at slide 23, we'll talk a little bit about the one-time infusions. But in general, the $19 billion is scheduled to be paid, amortized over, we had set that at essentially like a 30-year period. We're decrementing down. We're at about 21 years left. So that $19 billion is scheduled to be paid off, sort of like a mortgage. So what the one-time infusions that are listed here, the good news is there'll be like a $924 million infusion across a variety of the different plans. And so if we look at just the teacher plan, we're going to save about $1 billion in future interest payments, and then we'll lower teacher rates by about 40 basis points each year just by doing that. And so you'll put the money in, but you'll have longer-term savings. For the state employee plan, you'll save about $499 million in future interest payments by the state employee infusion, which was going to be about $270 million.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hope that helps answer your
Okay.
question.
Okay, introduce budget.
Okay, we'll go here. And just noting that one thing that's somewhat unique this year is that the Board of Trustees developed certified contribution rates and we are on slide 21. For the plans, and the introduced budget maintained the prior rates that were in place over the 21-22 biennium. And so the purpose of that was to put more funds into the plans without essentially increasing budgetary effort. And so this is to serve to reduce unfunded liabilities. And so what does that mean? If we maintain those rates, we'll collect an additional $345 million for the teacher plan. We'll increase funded status by about 70 basis points. We'll lower unfunded liabilities by about $382 million. Future rates should be lower by about 30 basis points. And we're expected to save about $500 million over the next 15 years in interest payments. And similarly, for the state plans, we would be looking at saving about $48 million over the next 15 years by maintaining those rates. We also have contribution rates related to the other post-employment benefit plans. Those are your group life insurance plan, our health insurance credit, our sickness and disability plan, and the local disability plan. And those are listed for you on slide 22. They are not generally as well funded as the other pension plans. Over time, they had more contribution rate holidays, and also GASB didn't require them to be pre-funded until a more recent period. But again, maintaining these rates, just like the pension plan, is designed to save interest payments over time. And so just for the example, the group life insurance program would save about $105 million in contributions over the next 15 years by maintaining that rate that was used in the prior biennium. So we talked a little bit about the cash infusions already.
Okay, can we just go
Yep.
back? So
Yep.
how much are we actually putting in the budget? I'm looking at all these
Sure.
numbers.
So you're putting in
924.
$924 for the one-time infusions.
And that's all categories put together, including, looks like constitutional officers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So we've put out all the detail on that. And then for the, let me go back to.
And that's a general fund check?
It's a mix because you'll have oh yes, that is a general fund check. I'm sorry, contribution. Yeah, 924 is general fund.
General
Yes,
fund,
yes.
right,
I'm sorry.
okay.
Yes.
Okay, once you make that deposit in June of 2023, how much liability would there be left at that point?
You'd still, well, remember there's 19-ish billion, so you're going to reduce.
By just that figure?
Yeah.
I got you.
But, and just to follow up Senator Lucas's point, I've never seen a fully funded pension plan. I mean, am I crazy? Is there such a thing?
We were fully funded prior to the tech bubble bursting. We were at about 106%.
You mean back in the
funded.
90s?
Yes.
I was say that the multiple tech bubbles burst, okay.
Yeah, long ago. But what actuaries will tell you is that your goal is to be moving toward 100% funded using reasonable assumptions over a finite period of time. And so we are moving in the right direction. And so getting to 100% isn't, you can still get to 100% if you used a ridiculous discount rate, for example, right? So you need to have those reasonable assumptions over a reasonable period of time and a structured way to pay those liabilities. So the 100 isn't necessarily always the goal. It's making sure you're moving that way and recognizing that really the volatility in the contribution rates relate to those unfunded liabilities. Right now, it's about 60% of the contribution rate is just to pay the amortization of those unfunded. So I hope that helps.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on that? Okay.
Okay. And then we'll skip really quickly. Adam had asked us to talk about a little bit about impacts of the pandemic on the retirement patterns. Generally, we had fewer retirements, and this is on slide 25. We had fewer retirements in fiscal year 2020, but we did have an uptick in 2021. Generally, the patterns, we expect to see a slight increase every year. So it was a little anomalous last year. But the teacher plan did have a slight uptick in teacher terminations and retirements in fiscal year 2021, and they also had slightly fewer new hires, right? So that's where they were. The state employee retirements have really remained relatively level. We haven't seen much of an impact there. SPORs had lower retirements than expected in 2020, but then they picked up in 2021, and political subdivisions in aggregate saw a slight decrease in retirements in 2020, followed by an uptick in 2021. With our group life insurance plan, we do expect those to increase every year, but we have an aging and maturing plan. But we did see a little bit claims that were higher than expected related to the pandemic. And we think that although Virginia is lower than our third-party administrators' overall book of business, but we did have 695 COVID-related deaths in 2021 and 423 in 2020. And we also have seen in our managed disabilities program that we have had increased short-term disability and long-term disability claims in both of those programs, and our behavioral health programs have been up.
Okay. I'm looking, what slide are you on? 26?
26.
Okay. I'm looking at, it says Line of Duty Act, that claims do not appear to have been impacted by COVID at this time. Claims received in 2020 and 2020 are slightly below 2019.
Yeah. And those, there are certain, with Line of Duty Act, those have certain, so those are death in the line of duty or illnesses related to certain presumptions. And so for some reason, there's just been an anomalous year that they just kind of clicked down.
And maybe someone up here can remind me, did we do a presumption on COVID-19? We did.
Yes.
And did we have a vaccine requirement attached to that?
That's what we just passed yesterday in Commerce and Labor, the vaccine requirement.
Okay, all right. There's the answer. All right.
Right.
Okay. Trish, anything else? Looks like we've covered a lot here.
Yep, the end of the presentation just has legislation that you will see that will come through this committee, but I'd be happy to take any other questions. I know that there are others who are.
Okay, any members of the panel have a question?
Yeah, I haven't familiarized myself with the legislation, but I see there's a subtopic called return to work. And what can you just describe that generally?
So when we talk about return to work as a public pension plan, it's folks who have retired from the plan and then they return to work in a position that is otherwise covered for benefits. So for example, we've had a critical shortage program for the teachers that's been in place for quite a while, where they can retire, then after a bona fide break in service, they can return to work and still continue to receive their pension benefit. And so the critical shortage for teachers has been sort of the one that's been around for a long time. In recent years, school security officers were added to that, as well as bus drivers. Why this matters for a pension plan is that it can potentially change retirement patterns, and people could retire sooner than they otherwise would, begin drawing benefits sooner, and then we don't have the time to invest those dollars in order to pay the benefits. So in general, most pension plans have somewhat of a dim view of return to work legislation because of the potential to impact retirement patterns, and also ensuring that we are compliant with the Internal Revenue Code's requirements related to returning to work, so that you need to show that there has been a bona fide break in service. And for those types of bills, we have used a 1-year break in service.
Okay.
Mr.
Adam.
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one other question was, I know there are 2 bills dealing with VRS being required to divest from certain topics, and that there's a constitutional prohibition or a constitutional guardrail that VRS has to invest for the best return. And I was wondering if you've reviewed those bills. Senator McPike had told me about his approach. I don't know if it is within the Constitution, or if you feel that he's been creative enough in the way he wrote the bill to get around that.
So divestment, generally, historically, the Board of Trustees has opposed divestment bills because under the Internal Revenue Code, under the Code of Virginia, as well as the Constitution that you pointed out, and there at the very end of the slide deck, I've put those provisions. We are required to invest in the fund must be invested in the sole interest of our members and beneficiaries. And so historically, the Board of Trustees has viewed having access to the broadest opportunity set possible is in the best interest of members and beneficiaries. And when we look at bills with divestment, particularly those that have a specific timeline to divest, you can not only impact investment costs, potential lost earnings, but you could also have transaction fees that could be detrimental to the fund. In the case of fossil fuel legislation, there are also some companies that are transitioning, and so you could be divesting from those. They could have a portion of their business related to fossil fuels, but they also do green energy, and you could be divesting from the very companies who are transitioning to renewables and clean energy.
So I'm not familiar with the bill. It'd be like divesting from General Motors or Ford or?
Divesting from perhaps Shell or
BP.
But what I'm trying to get at is, from your reading of the bill, if you've read the bill, and I don't know in full, is it within the Constitution for that bill to pass?
I think various constitutional reviewers may have different positions and in different and in our position, we don't believe that it is in the best interest of members and beneficiaries for the bill to pass.
Okay, I get
But I think one could make an argument with the constitutionality of it, but we have a fiduciary duty to our members and beneficiaries, and so that's where we.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that.
Yep, Trish, that was excellent, as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
And we're going to move on to Mike Watson, CIO, and Josh Hessling, Director of Legal of VITA. Gentlemen.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
members. I'm Joshua Hesslinger. This is Mike Watson. It's been a while since VITA has been before this body or other Senate committees. We're happy to be back. If you haven't been paying much attention to VITA of late, we invite you to look again because there has been a lot of progress and a lot of change. So I'm just starting now on slide 2 of our presentation up there. On this slide, all I want to point out is that Virginia has been a leader in IT service delivery for some time. We centralized years before a number of other states have been moving that way so as to reap the benefits of economies of scale, greater standardization, and we're now the 3rd state in the country to have implemented a multi-supplier model for our infrastructure services, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. On the next slide, VITA has a number of responsibilities that fall into generally the 4 bubbles or buckets that are up there All of them are important. Cybersecurity is our main focus this morning, obviously, but IT infrastructure services are also key to this discussion. So what does IT infrastructure services mean? It means core services, security, email, network, devices from the mainframe to laptops, and the cloud platforms on which applications are built. It generally doesn't mean the applications themselves. The agencies run within the standards and the environment that VITA provides. VITA provides all of our services with support and refresh and security, vetting, and governance included in the pricing. And by law, VITA operates on a chargeback model, which means that everything VITA does must be factored into our service rates. Moving to the 3-column slide here, a few highlights. The multi-supplier model that I mentioned is delivering. Suppliers are being held accountable, and that's not just words on a page. Through October, VITA has collected $10.4 million in performance credits. Service delivery is accelerating using the industry standard Agile methodology. We've seen a great improvement in customer agency satisfaction scores over the course of 2020 to 2021. Now, I am not declaring victory here. These things remain an important focus going forward. We know there's a lot more work to do, but there are definitely highlights. I've mentioned a couple of, or listed on this slide, a couple of the first in the nation public sector things that we have achieved recently. The robotic process automation service is notable. That's where you use software bots to do in seconds what would take a human minutes to do. And when you do that thousands of times, it can make a real difference, as it has for some of our agencies. And then the dual platform messaging that's mentioned here, Google and Microsoft, while staying integrated, is an example of VITA's vision of using competition to deliver value and protect the Commonwealth's interests. And the two major long-term projects listed here have been critical, enormous efforts involving a lot of people, cloud migration and the data center move. So moving to slide 5 now, one thing that hasn't changed at VITA is my co-presenter, Mike Watson, who is the second longest serving state chief information security officer in the country. And he's gonna take you into the world of cybersecurity, and then I'll return at the end to talk a couple of legislative things.
Believe
Okay.
me, my hair was not as gray when I started. So,
Take it away, Mike.
all right. First of all, thank you very much for having us this morning. I always get to enjoy talking to friendly new faces, so thank you for having us. And I figured what I kind of try to touch a little bit on is, I know cybersecurity is complicated, so I'm going to keep it very high level and talk specifically about some of the roles and what it is that's driving VITA's focus in what we're looking at in the cybersecurity landscape. So first, let me start off with the players, because if nothing else, it gets a little bit complicated. Cybersecurity is a team effort. There are 3 roles that play a major focus in the cybersecurity program in the Commonwealth. The first 2 belong to VITA, and the third one belongs to the agencies. So on that slide that's in front of you, on slide 5, you can see that we kind of drew 3 different boxes here. One of the things that VITA is responsible for is setting the governance requirements for what a information security program looks like, what's considered adequate. Basically, all the policies and standards, and this is how you end up doing it, and to keep yourself protected and your data and systems protected. The second role, also belonging to VITA, is more of what Josh had mentioned previously. We provide all of the technology and tool sets to be able to monitor and manage the environment, and when something does happen, we're able to respond and react and address the issues. And then the third is where the agencies come in. They run all their applications, obviously, so they're the ones close to the business and understand all the security attached to the applications. Who's supposed to have access to what? How are those structured? What are they supposed to be talking to? Those kind of pieces. Right. On the next slide here, on slide 6, you can see I'll kind of talk a little bit about the actual pieces of the program with the understanding what the now that you kind of understand who the roles and the players are. There are 3 primary areas that we're focused on in the security program. The first being the governance piece. We are align ourselves very heavily with the federal standards. The NIST standards. There's 2 primary reasons for that. One is a lot of our partners, right, being close to DC are familiar with the federal standards, and it makes a lot of conversations with them easier. The second piece is so that we follow all the regulatory requirements that we've got out there and make sure that we align with those. A lot of the requirements are the same. Another part of our program is our threat management, our cyber attack monitoring. This is the stuff that you see on the news pretty frequently. Somebody comes into an environment, compromises the system. You see the headlines on ransomware and other things. This group, this function, make sure that when that happens, we are both prepared and able to respond and remediate those issues in the environment to keep them from becoming critical. And then the third one is the risk management program, and that's tied to making sure that we understand just how much risk we're taking on. We measure our risk both in dollars and citizen impact, so we understand both scenarios and know just how much liability we're taking on as a Commonwealth as a whole. That also makes sure that we understand what our cyber insurance policies and other things need to look like based off of how the agencies and the Commonwealth are using our systems across the board. All right, so like I said, very brief, very, very kind of high-level overview of how the program is structured. And I want to make sure that was, kind of laid out so that we're talking about these next pieces and understanding what it is that we're trying to combat against and why it is that we're looking to, adjust some of our models going forward. So I always like numbers as kind of an idea to describe just what's happening to the Commonwealth system environment. So you'll see on the right-hand side here, there are two kind of graphical representations. We've got tons and tons of stats, but people's eyes glaze over when you get through more than just a few. So I usually use the attack numbers just to kind of put it in scale. Now, these numbers are unfortunately what a lot of organizations are dealing with. There's millions and millions of attacks happening every day, month, year. We're no different. We have a lot of different attempts that come in the environment and issues that we are able to successfully prevent. We also know that there are a lot of issues that we've got to address across the board. You'll see at the bottom graph there, the web scan vulnerabilities are good examples of where we know that there are issues, within the Commonwealth as a whole. We are trying to protect ourselves against things like the ransomware attacks that you've seen previously. We're trying to make sure that we've got protections in place for cyber fraud, some of the supply chain things. We don't want to end up, and I can go into lots of detail if anybody's truly interested, but some of the big news that happened at the end of actual last year with some of our supply chain folks like Microsoft and SolarWinds and other things that you may have seen in the news where these different parties are getting compromised and infected, and that trickles down into the Commonwealth. We have to make sure that we are, protecting ourselves against those impacting the Commonwealth, as well as making sure that we are prepared and aware for what happens when that does actually occur. There are lots of different environmental drivers making this happen. The success of a lot of these malicious actors setting this up as a business, right? They're very profitable from their perspective, and it's very low barrier to entry into getting into that particular area. So the ransomware types of attacks and the cyber attacks on systems where they're able to take data and other things are very cheap for them to execute and very expensive for us to respond to. We focus on a very large preparedness and containment philosophy where we make sure that when something does happen, we limit the impact to the Commonwealth as much as possible as part of our response plan. Which leads us into kind of our cybersecurity priorities over the next few years, right? We are looking at ways to, improve some of our response and coordination. I'm sure a number of folks have been familiar with some of the localities and other areas that have been experiencing increased, ransomware and cyber attacks. We obviously saw in the news the last few months about, the types of cyber attacks that are impacting different levels of government across the board. We don't expect that to change. We expect that to kind of get increase as time goes on. And so we're preparing ourselves to make sure that we're able to combat that and coordinate our response even better than what we've been previously. We know that the technology out there is also, unfortunately, as it gets more complex, there is also more opportunity for issues. Again, and even in just the last 3 months, we've seen at least 3 or 4 different major companies have either compromises or major vulnerabilities that they announced. For those of you who may be familiar with a company like Kronos, the timekeeping software used across the Commonwealth in a number of different areas. When a company like that ends up going, their services get cut off, we have to do a lot in order to cover that, right? We had several agencies that all of their timekeeping went out the window. Trying to be able to maintain that is a problem, right? So it's those kind of things that we try to prepare ourselves for. Our security model is going to shift because of this. We're looking at just like any other industry, security folks love buzzwords. It's called the Zero Trust Framework is what we're looking to try to migrate to. That adjusts our model to get a lot of our security closer to the data itself so that when we do use third parties for services and other items, we're not necessarily we're prepared for when an actual issue happens. It doesn't matter as much where the actual data is located. We have stronger protections closer to the data. The other pieces that we know are becoming more and more important are our operational technology and our critical infrastructure security. Those are the things that impact the physical world, right? We saw last year with Colonial Pipeline what just happens when some of our operational technology pieces, the stuff that runs and manages our physical interactions, becomes compromised or unavailable to us. Fortunately, and when I've talked to folks before, I've said, fortunately, we were in the middle of a pandemic where everybody was remote. If we were not, we would have probably suffered a much heavier impact from that actual compromise as it was. And for those who may not be familiar, the Colonial Pipeline was when the attackers got into the systems and prevented the gas flow up and down the East Coast. Several businesses many businesses had trouble doing things like fueling their trucks. It had a big impact to the economy, let alone, general operations across the board. And like I said, fortunately, a lot of us were remote, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. We know that that's a pretty significant area that we're worried about in the future, and we're looking to put some focus on that as well. We know that one of the other areas that we have already seen is, of course, the ransomware piece. So we're looking to implement some additional recovery solutions to make sure that in the case we are hit, the recovery is seamless and quick.
That takes me to the question.
Sure.
We had the ransomware issue with DLS.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? How was it resolved? Is it resolved? What was the lasting effect?
So I'll give understanding from, so just to make sure that we separate, we don't have management over that part, right? Because the separation of duties between the different branches. But we did help provide advice and suggestions and
So
directions.
DLS does not contract with VITA?
No, it does not. We were aware of what was happening. We had talked to DLS to make sure that they understood, what the best practices were, how to recover based on, some of our expertise. They also brought in third party to help them, a good security company to be able to help do some of the recovery. So they took all the right steps. We also provided support for bringing their systems back on. So when you have a ransomware attack, the biggest problem is a lot of the stuff that you've got is no longer trusted. So we were able, as VITA, since we already have technology footprints, we were able to give them a whole bunch of systems to start with while they recovered their environment. It's one of the reasons they were able to get services back up and running that quickly, is we were able to say, here, use this stuff. That's the type of stuff that we try to prepare for, rapid recovery and action.
Okay.
And then, of course, the last item on there is augmenting workforce and resources, which is kind of one of the bigger pieces of what we've got in our budget pieces this year. We've seen, obviously, the actual security needs go up over the last couple of years. The pandemic, of course, made things, I'll say, pause a little bit, but not all that much. You'll see the trends that I included as just two excerpts of some of the items that we measure and watch over the years. It's probably the pandemic is a good example of what's going to happen in the future. So just to put it in perspective, one of the things that we had looked at for services is as third-party services become more popular. Cloud is the easiest one that a lot of people have heard of. That just means our systems and services are going out and spread out to third parties. Each one of those interactions has to be evaluated and checked to make sure that the Commonwealth isn't going to suffer some major issue in the case that there's an outage or that there's an impact to the systems, to make sure we also have the right liability coverage in the case that something bad happens at that organization, so that the Commonwealth's not on the hook. So there's a ton of those types of interactions and reviews and pieces, and we knew with the cloud push, we were going to see that over the years. With the pandemic, it just hit the accelerator on that, because a lot of the digital interactions that were planned to happen over years happened very quickly because we didn't have in-person interactions anymore.
Well, what happens if, because of the impact of COVID, you have staff, but they're not able to get to the site where they're supposed to be?
So
You can't do this stuff remotely.
some things we can do actually remotely, and we do have contingencies in place for anything that can't be. There are protocols and steps that we've basically put in place so we can send people out to wherever it is that we need to go. And there was significant precaution because you're right, deploying things like pieces of equipment, right? It's not like they magically show up. Somebody's got to be able to move them from spot to spot. We set up protocols with all of our suppliers and to make sure that that was done safely so that things could get where they needed to go. So 100% agree with you. It was,
Does
it took us a
VITA have
couple
its
weeks.
own vehicle fleet? Do you drive to the, one with the sirens blaring?
You should have waited until she got that coffee down.
Like Geek Squad, flying to the
You
rescue.
almost had an accident on me.
All right, Senator Eben, did you have a question?
No, it's just asking your.
Kind of like that visual. Okay, anything else? We got one last presentation, so anything else?
Yeah, we can just take a couple minutes on
Sure.
the last two
Of course.
slides here on 10 now to talk about a few of the legislative and budget items. One thing I wanted to mention and start with is there's a new federal grant program for state and local cybersecurity, part of the recently passed infrastructure bill. It will result in about a little over $21 million in federal money being available to Virginia, as long as there is about 4.9 in state matching funds. 80% of that money will go to the localities with a designated percentage to rural areas as well. It requires us to do a few things, so there are a couple of budget amendments related to that. Thank you to Senator Eben for introducing those. And then we've got another on slide 11, a number of other legislative and budget things going on to line up with the priorities that Mike just went through. We've got a bill to ensure that cybersecurity incident reporting is done throughout government, not just in the executive branch, which is the way the code is now. Obviously, incidents reach well beyond the executive branch into all levels of government. And then revamping one of the councils to enable private sector and legislative input. There's another bill for that. We've got a budget amendment to require that vulnerabilities that get identified get resolved. And then there are a number of items in the introduced budget to support some of the things that Mike was mentioning, the cyber recovery solution for ransomware, the zero trust implementation, and then 11 new cybersecurity positions at VITA, which is not the full extent of the need, but is a great step. And we have been very pleased and excited that technology and cybersecurity is a priority for the new administration. I think their initial budget amendment on cybersecurity reflects that, and we look forward to working with them to take further steps that need to get us to where we need to be.
Great. Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to see you're adding 11 new, or proposed 11 new positions. But even with my budget amendment and those 11 new positions, do you have the resources you need to prevent catastrophic cyber events from occurring, or how close are we to being where we need to be?
So we look at this, we still have a little ways to go, and part of what I think we're trying to do this is to not over ask without understanding exactly what the picture is going to look like. So we think this is a good first structured step. Once we get further into it next year, we'll have a better feel for what the next out year looks like. But I would love to say 100% yes, but until we get a little bit further into it, we're pretty understaffed at the moment, which I think was the result of the JLARC reports and other things. Even if we wanted to say that we were going to increase that number to what we think it would be today, we wouldn't be able to support bringing that many people on in the group. It's too much. So we're trying to be.
So you're happy for the interim step?
Yeah. We're trying to be careful.
Okay.
It definitely takes time to hire people. We're working hard on that. We have been. And then I think Governor Youngkin's amendment reflects a desire to ensure that we've got resources available that can be deployed in a coordinated, centralized manner to wherever the need is greatest. And so that's why he has proposed consolidating some of the specific cybersecurity items in the budget and then also adding $20 million a year to ensure that once assessments have been done and we know where the needs are, that resources can be devoted to that to cover those.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Just
Senator
for the record, I'm glad to see the Youngkin administration doing that. I'm not being shy about where I disagree with them, so I want to issue a rare compliment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the time.
Yep, very good. Okay, Chris. Okay, tab 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Piper from the Department of Elections, and I think I'll be pretty brief here. Go through a brief history of how we got to where we are and kind of where we are with the statewide voter registration and election management system. You might remember 2017, a proposal came in from the Department of Elections to infuse $5 million over 5 years to the department to improve Veris. However, the following year, JLARC released their report and suggested that we do further studying on full replacement for Veris. We did that, obviously, beginning with the request from the appropriations in the budget that we create a draft RFP. We prepared that RFP through, we used assistance of nationally known election subject matter experts, utilized surveys of our general registrars, site visits, and interviews of that staff as well. From that, in 2020, at the request of the General Assembly, we prepared an RFI, and the RFI informed us about the estimated costs for replacing Veris. We submitted that, and then in 2020, at the request of the General Assembly, we put together our request for proposal. That was released in March with deadline for proposals in mid-May. Throughout the summer, we heard proposals from the various vendors who applied. We are in the midst of finalizing things. ELECT is following our process for competitive negotiation through the Procurement Act. Obviously, this is a closed process, but it continues and is ongoing. It is a high-risk contract, and of course, we're working very, very closely with the Office of the Attorney General and VITA, and want to personally thank our guys over there, along with several other in the procurement process in VITA. They've been incredibly helpful.
What does a high-risk contract mean? What is that?
So a high-risk contract is essentially any procurement over $10 million, and IT procurement over $10 million. This one, as you might remember, the estimate is $29 million.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's a significant investment. And on behalf of my friend Matt Davis, who's the former CIO, he actually, when he drafted up in 2017 the estimate, he proposed about $30 million. And when we did the full RFI, we found that that was actually correct. So, but anyway, we're working very closely and diligently with OAG and VITA. So I'm not going to go through this, but essentially we got federal funds from Cybersecurity 2020 money from the federal government as part of a HAVA grant. And then there was a match from the General Assembly, and then the unallotted funds have been secured and applied to this replacement project. So it's fully funded as of this moment. And that's essentially where we are today. Negotiations are ongoing, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the procurement to this point.
Okay, questions from the panel. Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, are we, I know there's federal matching funds you referenced. Are we, in the introduced budget, maximizing all the federal funds that we can draw down?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Every penny of that federal matching fund has been applied to the Veris replacement project.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
This November, we're scheduled to have same-day voter registration on Election Day. How's preparations for that going in terms of, I mean, it's a big undertaking because I guess every polling place in the state will have to be able to call in to make sure someone didn't vote somewhere else or something? Is that how that works?
That's correct. And we're working through that process right now. We feel fully confident that we can apply it in Veris and be ready to go October 1st. There's no doubt in my mind that we'll be ready to go to have that ready for 2022.
Great, thank you.
You're
Wonderful.
gonna have to work hand in glove.
I will say that the team at Vita has been a great resource for us, and we're very glad to be working with them.
Okay. Any other questions? Very good. Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Enjoy.
Good meeting.
All right, gang, we're in time for 8:30. We got to be at finance at what, 9? 9, okay. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Yep.